I'm thanking my friends from F. Murray Abraham, Marlo Thomas, Tony Roberts, and Lila Robbins for joining us. And I'm going to I'll start out by reading an early chapter in the book that does not need, I don't think, any background except to say it could never happen today. Never. One weekend in 1966, I decided to look up Elia Kazan in the Manhattan telephone directory. I didn't think I'd find him there, but there he was, listed as a business with a Broadway address. I couldn't believe it. I wrote down the address, and on a late Monday afternoon, I headed over. The office building was small and located behind the cashier's booth at the Victoria Theater on Broadway and 46th Street. I looked at the directory, no Kazan listed, so I waited outside the theater. Around 5 o'clock, Kazan came out. He was a short man, but he walked very quickly. I followed him, and even though I was much younger and much taller than he, I could barely keep up with him. I followed him for over a mile, afraid to talk to him. When he reached his home, a brownstone on 68th Street, I scurried away. The next day brought the same scenario, with me following him all the way home without saying a word to him. On the third day, we reached 49th Street and Broadway. He suddenly whirled around, pointed a finger up at me, and said, "Who are you? What do you want? And why are you following me?" All I could stammer was, a la Jackie Gleason, "Calm down," he said, "and walk with me." And we turned back downtown. "Let's go to my office and talk." As we walked, he described in rapid detail the things we passed, the person who interested him, a store he frequented, a car along the way. Didn't matter what he said, because the thought that kept running through my head was, Elia Kazan is talking to me. And I'm going to his office to have a chat. We went into a tiny two-room office. There was a little room for a secretary and a second room with a couch on which he stretched out like a cat. I sat upright across from him. "Now, what is it you want?" he asked. "I want to work for you," I said. "I'll take no money. I just want to be around you and learn from you." "Well, there are 100 of actors willing to do that," he said. "I'm not an actor." "Well, then tell me, who the hell are you?" I don't remember exactly what I said, but I know I babbled on for a long time. I told him I had worked at the ABC television network and was currently working at the Walter Reed Organization, a movie theater chain. I had graduated college, served in the Army, worked as a cab driver, a pin boy in a bowling alley, and okay, he says, "Enough. You work for a theater chain. Have you ever heard of a movie called A Face in the Crowd?" "Sure. Andy Griffith, Patricia Neal, Walter." He says, "I know who's in it. I made it." "How about Baby Doll? Carol Baker, Carl?" "Well, look," he said, "listen to me. I'm going to get those 2 films back from Warner Brothers. It's part of my deal with Jack Warner. Do you think you could do something with them?" "Absolutely," I cried, having 1 or 2 ideas at best. At that time, there were no DVDs or video cassettes, no pay, no basic cable. There was some revival theaters, and there was free television. "Good," he said. "Oh, and before I forget, if you can sell them to television, I want no commercial interruptions. And they can't cut a frame of it. I hate to see my films on television. They always cut them up." "Right," I said loudly. After that meeting, I ended up representing Kazan on those 2 films, and a few years later, he got back America, America, and he gave that one to me too. Over the years, he was always there to counsel me, encourage me, he inspired me, he hurt me, he taught me, he appreciated me. I worshipped him. No person I could ever meet, I never had met, could excite me with such the sheer power of his intelligence. I'd leave a meeting with him intoxicated with ideas and plans. Spending time with Elia was like taking a powerful drug without ever having to come down. As he got older, he mellowed. That unbelievable force was gone. But every once in a while at a meeting, a little bit of it would return. I often found myself tearing up when it happened, though I never let him see it. He would have been furious. "You think I can make it to 90? He asked once, when he was 88 years old. "Of course," I said. "I'll throw you a big 90th birthday party. You can invite all the people you want." "Be a small party then," he said. My wife and I did end up throwing that party, and it wasn't small. Every time we opened our front door, another legend walked in. It was a great night, and he told me in just the right words how much he appreciated it. It's now many years since I stalked him. There isn't a great deal of loyalty at times in show business, but for 37 years I represented Elia Kazan with no contract, just his firm handshake. I first saw Lila Robbins in Mrs. Klein with Uta Hagen, a three-hander. Can you imagine a young actress having to work opposite Miss Uta Hagen? And of course we've seen Lila on stage in The Real Thing, and my God, Homeland, and so many things. The great thing about this panel for me, besides the fact that they're here, the great thing about it is the fact that they all work in all the mediums. They have television, theater, film. Many, many actors, as we know, do not do theater. They can't do theater. They're not good enough to do theater. They can't project. You know, I've seen some great stars on stage not projecting. Our four people here can project. Anyhow, Lila,
And
please.
here's proof.
And here it is.
This is a chapter called The Radio Show. Hopefully the eyes will hold up. One day, not long after that, I received a call from John Doyle, who was in charge of the New York City Theater controlled by Walter Reed. I was sure he was calling to congratulate me on Show of Shows, and I welcomed the call. I liked John. Everyone did. A schmoozer with a Texas drawl. He was the go-to guy for tennis tournament tickets, Broadway shows, baseball games, and more, and I waited to hear his compliments. He surprised me with what he said instead. "Julian, you should have your own radio talk show," he told me. "Thanks," I laughed. "Okay with me. What's your plan?" "My friend is the sales manager for WMCA Talk Radio," he explained. "They want to do a show on movies. You have to speak to the public on the phone and do interviews, but I know you can do it." I was then 32 years old, and I had never been on the radio, but I was interested. We went over to WMCA and met with the general manager and John's friend, the sales manager. When I told him I was interested, the general manager said, "Good, you'll go on today as a guest on the Leon Lewis show at 3 p.m. It was now 2:30 p.m. Not much time to prepare. Fortunately, Leon was gracious and charming. I told stories, I talked about current films, I talked about classics. I laughed with Leon, and then we talked on the phone with the public. I was on fire, and I stayed a full hour. At the end of my guest shot, the two men who ran the station were waiting for me in the hallway. "Very good," they both said. "We want you to do just one more show." "Fella, this is it," I said. "That's the best I can do. If what you've heard isn't good enough, I can't do any better." They said they'd get back to me. "Don't worry," John whispered when they'd gone. "It's in the bag." "Why?" I asked. "They're dying on Sunday night, and I told them we get movie stars to come on with you." Well, I did know a few movie names, and so did John, and he was right. They did say okay. They had one stipulation. They insisted I change my last name. That didn't work for me. I knew that Schlossberg was sometimes hard for people to pronounce, but this was New York City. A lot of Jewish folks lived there. I refused, and they eventually gave in. On a Tuesday, John told me we were on for Sunday. "Wait a minute," I stammered. It's Tuesday. We need a guest. We need some sort of outline." "Don't worry, Julian," John said. "It's in the bag." We were scheduled from 8 to 9 p.m., primetime Sunday. My first guest was film producer Stephen J. Friedman, whose big hit was The Last Picture Show. We had known each other a while, and I knew he could talk. Plus, he had a new Sidney Lumet film opening called Loving Molly, starring Anthony Perkins, Blythe Danner, Beau Bridges, and newcomer named Susan Sarandon. We had a lot to talk about. I thought it would be a piece of cake. But being a host on the radio is not the same as being a guest. The guest doesn't have to worry about the pace of the show, or the commercials, or the time left. As the guest, you almost always know more about the subject than the host, but the host has a lot of homework to do. At some point, I knew I had to open the phones to the public. I wondered whether anyone would actually call in, I had told my parents and girlfriend to phone in with questions if no one dialed the station, so it wouldn't be too embarrassing. When all 7 of our lines lit up at once, I was relieved. I went to the first line. "You're on WMCA," I said. "Julian?" a male voice asked. "Yes." The caller let out a huge Bronx cheer. This is done by sticking out your tongue and making a noise that sounds a lot like flatulence. "Thank you for calling," I immediately answered. Though there was a 7-second delay and I knew no listener had heard the call, I started to sweat. My hand was shaking as I pushed line number 2. "Hello, you're on WMCA." "Mr. Schlossberg," another voice whispered. "Yes." "Fuck you." Whoa. "Well, thank you very much, sir." I was now a basket case. Fortunately, the rest of the callers were all polite. Though I would be on WMCA for 7 years and later WOR for 2 more, I never, ever had that kind of rudeness again. But what a baptism by fire. When the hour was mercifully almost over, my producer told me, "You have 1 minute left." I panicked. "Good night," I said immediately, "and I'll be back next week." Pause. To my horror, I realized that I had 55 seconds were still left on the show. "You're listening to WMCA," I ad-libbed. "We are 570 on your dial." Pause. "My name is Julian Schlossberg." This was probably the only time I've ever been glad my name was so long. "And the name of our show is Movie Talk." Pause. "Stephen J. Friedman has been our guest." Pause. "His new film, Loving Molly, opens this week." Finally, it was 9 p.m., and I was drenched in perspiration. That was a nerve-wracking experience, but it did get better. Within 6 months, I was given another hour, then another, then another. Within a year, we were on from 8 o'clock to midnight, 4 hours. Then I was offered 1 more hour. I had to refuse. 8 to midnight was enough. The show turned out to be a good example of the power of word of mouth. I did what apparently few hosts did. I actually watched the movies, read the books, and went to the plays. And as a result, the guests told each other and their PR people, "This guy does his homework." Though I never quit my day job at Walter Reed, I loved doing that radio show. And I met a lot of people on it, some of whom became lifelong friends.
When you think of the incomparable actresses on Broadway, off-Broadway, and TV and film, you think of Lila Robbins. Lila, where can we see you right now?
Well, I continue to work on Amazon's The Boys. This is the 3rd season. We shoot that up in Toronto, so that's been a lot of fun. And I did finish the finale season of the original Walking Dead, which thought I never would do, but there I am. I played the big bad lady in the last 14 episodes of the entire show, which had gone on for 11 years. It's one of the longest running shows ever.
Now, can we see you back on stage?
I would love to get back on stage. I don't think I've done a play since pre-pandemic, so it's time, definitely. Hopefully I still have those muscles. They're different muscles.
They are different muscles.
I hope I have them, or I will develop them quickly. I'd love to do a play again. There's nothing like the live audience. So.
And how did you meet Julian?
Julian reached out to me to do a reading of a play that we're in development with. It's a play I'm working on with F. Murray Abraham.
Oh, so it's the Norman Mailer.
Ah, so you know all about it.
I've heard about it now.
Okay.
Yes.
yes. I play the interviewer.
Okay.
Of the son, who is also is a three-hander play, and we're hoping to get into production at some point soon.
And what haven't I asked you that you would like our audiences to know?
I would just like to encourage everyone to go back to the theater. I've been going as of late, and I feel very safe. I wear my mask. I feel very comfortable being there. And just wash your hands, wear your mask, and come to the theater, because there's so many great plays to see right now, and the theater needs you, so come out.
Thank you so much.
Tony Roberts and I first met when he was doing Promises. He had actually won an incredible London Critics Award for Promises in London. He did it, of course, on Broadway. He based on The Apartment, the movie, and I loved when he said, "Miss Kubelik, Miss Kubelik," and every time I saw Tony, I'd say, "Miss Kubelik." We tried so hard to work together, and finally, darn it, during pandemic no less, we did the Mornings at 7 revival together. So I thank Tony, and I hope we'll work again together. Okay.
178, 175,
while he's looking, I opened I was at Paramount, I was at the ABC network, and then I went to Walter Reed in the television division, then I went into the theater division, and at 27 I was the youngest head of a major theater chain in the history of the country, or so Variety said. And I then went to Paramount for a couple of years, and that was the 2 worst years of my life as a vocation, not because of Paramount as much as the studio system. It was just not for me. It wasn't the waters I could swim in, because I was really interested in making movies, and while people there, that was part of their job, most of the interest in studios were perpetuating their power. That was number 1, number 2, number 3. And while I didn't want to lose power, it wasn't, I was trying to figure out a way to run a studio, which I never was able to do. So I opened my own company called Castle Hill Productions, and what Tony will be reading is one of the calls I got running a film distribution company. Just quickly, I had great classics, Stagecoach by John Ford, I had To Be or Not to Be by Lubitsch, I had Foreign Correspondent with Alfred Hitchcock. So I had a wonderful classic library, but I was always looking for new films. Take it away, Tony.
Oh, got it. Scorsese and Fellini. Martin Scorsese called our office. I can't say that we knew each other very well, but he had appeared on my radio show, and I had interviewed him for a film I produced called Hollywood Uncensored. He wanted me to know that Fellini's last 2 films were available for U.S. distribution. One was called La Luna, and the other, Intervista. These titles translated to The Moon and Interview, respectively. I screened them both, and though I didn't respond to La Luna, I liked Intervista a lot. It starred Marcello Mastroianni and Anita Ekberg, who had been the stars of Fellini's early hit, La Dolce Vita. At that time, Miss Ekberg, was considered by many to be the most beautiful woman in the world. In Intervista, Fellini and Mastroianni pay a surprise visit to her home, where we find she has aged and gained weight. But within the movie, an amazing thing happens. A cassette of La Dolce Vita is put on, and Ekberg watches herself as a young, gorgeous woman. And Fellini, with the help of his cameraman and director of photography, shows us a radiant and dazzling older Anita Ekberg viewing the film. It is one of the most extraordinarily moving moments in any Fellini film, and it's done with warmth, style, and love. Marty and I presented the film in Italian with English subtitles. The New York Times gave it a rave review, and we did business. It meant a lot to me to present a Fellini movie with Scorsese. I was proud to be associated with both of them, but I also knew how to answer the question often posed in elementary school tests: which one doesn't belong? The chance to be associated with these 2 titans of film was an incredible privilege for me, and one I will never forget.
I am so excited. We are with the incredible Tony Roberts. Tony, what are you doing now? I last saw you at Mornings at 7, so what are you working on now?
Well, I'm trying to write something for the first time seriously in my life. I'm trying to write a fiction novel based on 70 books I read as audiobooks for Simon and Schuster and Penguin Audio, written by the recently deceased Stuart Woods. And I read 70 of his books, and unfortunately, he passed away, and I don't know if there'll be any more of his books, unless they're written from the other side of the grave.
Now we're here because it is a book launching for Julian.
Yeah.
How did you work with Julian?
Well, I was on Julian's radio program decades ago as a guest to be interviewed for his program. And he then asked me a few decades later to take a role in Mornings at 7, which opened last year, not far from this very spot. But the COVID epidemic caused us to have to close early. So that's the last thing I did.
Is there a role that you'd like to take on that you haven't had a chance to take on yet?
I always answered that question by saying Henry V, because that's the film that influenced me the most when I was a kid. I was taken to see the Olivier movie of it, and I was smitten. But I never got to play it, and it's a little late now.
You've acted, but have you ever wanted to direct or do other things in the industry?
Well, I did direct a play by Charles Grodin about, years ago, that opened and had a fairly successful run, I think. He wrote a very funny play about an opening night with a lot of actors in it. And I was privileged to be the director of that.
Can we see you direct again?
I have no idea. If the phone rings, maybe.
And what haven't I asked you that you would like our audience to know about you?
That I was very blessed and very lucky, and that I had a very satisfying career among these blocks. I was in 23 Broadway shows, and some of them closed in 5 minutes, and some of them ran for a year or 2 or 3. But I was very lucky. You need a lot of luck in this business.
Thank you so much.
I started that radio show in the 70s, and one of my first guests was this beautiful, vivacious actress starring on Broadway who became one of my 2 sisters. I was an only child, and I write in the book that Marlo and Elaine May are my 2 sisters. We've been friends for so long. We've done movies together. We've done theater together. And I don't even know. We just did a television show. We just did New York 1 today. And nobody could sell the book better than Marlo. She fantastic. So this is a play that got to Broadway, but I promise you, as you will hear, the inspiration for it was Marlo.
Relatively speaking, Elaine May had written 2 one-act comedies, and we needed a third for another evening of theater. Having produced both death-defying acts and power plays, I was becoming somewhat knowledgeable about the 3 one-act format. Clearly I needed another one-act, but one that complemented Elaine's 2. I read many, but kept coming up dry. One day Elaine called to say she may have found one, adding, "See what you think." Elaine is an avid reader. Her first movie, A New Leaf, was based on a short story, Tenderheart, that she found in an Ellery Queen anthology. So when she told me this play was written by John Marachek, the name meant nothing to me, or to me, obviously. I was hoping for Woody Allen or Dave Mamet, but I dutifully read Trotsky is Dead and liked it. It was a clever comedy that had never been produced in the U.S. We got the rights and again adhered to my policy of trying it first out of town. A year before, I had taken a new play by the actor Charles Grodin, The Co-op Chronicles, to the Magic Theater in San Francisco. We had a successful run, enjoyed working with the artistic director, Christopher Smith, who was also directing the play. So I called Chris, and I told him of the 3 one-acts, mentioning that Elaine was going to be the director. He read the plays and happily agreed to present them. Having worked with Marlo Thomas, we both agreed she would be perfect for the lead in the longest of the 3 plays, George is Dead. She read it and agreed to do the play. So in the fall of 2006, we took off to open in San Francisco. Before rehearsals began, Elaine realized she didn't have enough time to direct all 3 plays. I suggested we ask Jeannie Berlin. She had directed It's My Party when I ran the Arclight Theater. It starred F. Murray Abraham and Joyce Van Patten and had been directing very well. As I mentioned earlier, Jeannie is Elaine's daughter, so we were keeping it all in the family. Fortunately, she was available and agreed to direct Elaine's other one-act, On the Way. We needed a male lead for Trotsky is Dead, and for On the Way, we wanted one actor to play both roles. Mark Rydell, the film director of On Golden Pond and Cinderella Liberty, had spent many years as an actor. We sent him the play, and he agreed to come to San Francisco. We had 6 or 7 roles to cast, for which we auditioned many fine local actors. For the chauffeur in On the Way, we cast a young unknown named David Diggs. He co-starred years later in Hamilton in New York and won the Tony. He is no longer unknown. The plays did well. George is Dead specifically was hailed by all. So what next? Well, I was convinced I needed a major writer's name to go with Elaine's. As good as John's play was, his name was unknown. I didn't relish searching for a new one-act, so I suggested to Elaine to try and combine her 2 one-acts and expand George is Dead to a full-length play. Elaine agreed, and I waited for her to work her magic. It took her a while, but she did it. We now had our full-length play, and we sent it to David Saint. David is a fine director who is also the artistic director of the George Street Playhouse in Rutherford, New Jersey. He read the new play and said he wanted to present it. Oh, he added, but there's one big problem to be solved. You have to change the title. Why? I asked. 2 reasons, he explained. One is that I don't want my subscribers to think that it's about the death of George W. Bush, who was then president. And 2, I don't want them to think it's closing of my theater, which was named George Street. So we opened the play under a new title, Roger is Dead. Julian. That's a producer. Marlowe agreed to star once again. The reviews were good, the audiences loved it, but Elaine still didn't feel right about it. She said, let me make some changes, I've got some rewrites I want to do. Once again, the time went by, and then Elaine delivered another version with her original title, George is Dead. It was starting to appear as if George had 9 lives. And this version was new and improved. I needed to find another out-of-town theater, and I wanted another star to play Marlowe's character's husband, who in this incarnation has new scenes with her. Years before on my radio show, I had met and become fast friends with the actor Don Murray. Don had been the male lead with Marilyn Monroe in Bus Stop, had co-starred in Advise and Consent, Baxter Party, and The Hoodlum Priest, and was Kathleen Turner's dad in Peggy Sue Got Married. I'd seen him on Broadway with his ex-wife, Hope Lang, in the hit Same Time Next Year, and knew he liked theater. So I called him. I sent him the play, and he agreed to do it. Now to find another regional theater, with the hope of finally coming to New York. David Ira Goldstein was the artistic director of the Arizona Theater Company, and on a hunch, I picked up the phone and dialed his number. I didn't know him, but I liked a man with 3 names. My hunch was right. He responded to the pedigree of Elaine, Marlowe, and Don. He had only had one concern. Oh no, I thought, not the title. Oh no, he said. I want to play in 2 cities, Phoenix and Tucson. I was able to get everyone to agree, and we played successfully in both cities. But I still wasn't ready to open the play in New York. It's worth noting here that in almost all cities except New York, there are just a handful of theaters, at most. In New York, there are more than 50, and most of them are on or near Broadway, and the competition is fierce, the reviewers unrelenting. We were always a success out of town, but playing New York, well, that can be different. Don Murray returned to Santa Barbara, Marlowe, Elaine, and I returned to New York, and it appeared that despite our successful runs all over the country, we weren't going to play in New York. One day, Marlowe, Elaine, and I met at Elaine's, and Marlowe asked me, what can we do about our play? I'm sorry, Marlowe, I said. I don't want to produce it. Neither do I, said Elaine. I tried it twice to make it into a full-length play, but it's really a one-act. Marlowe then said, so you don't want to produce it, and you only want it as a one-act, so why the hell are we here? You remember how hard it was to find an additional one-act, let alone 2 one-acts, I said. Well, how did you do death-defying acts and power plays? Marlowe asked. When I told her what we previously was written here, she said, well, you know Woody Allen. Why don't you call him? See if he has a one-act. So I did, and Woody said he had one. But it had a big cast. I told him I didn't care. I read it, and it was funny. So adding in Woody's sister, Letty Aronson, who had been producing Woody's movies, I now had a co-producer and 2 one-acts. The search began for the 3rd play. I called Neil Simon, Larry Gelbart, David Mamet. All were engaged and didn't have time to write a new one-act. No plays in the famous writer's trunk either. One day I was seeing a play at the Atlantic Theater, and I arrived early. I started looking at the window cards hanging on the walls, depicting past productions. I was surprised to see that Ethan Coen of the Coen brothers had written 2 or 3 plays that the Atlantic had produced. Maybe he could be our 3rd playwright. Elaine, Letty, and Woody agreed, so I contacted him. Ethan agreed to write a new one-act, and with everyone's okay, I decided to go straight to Broadway, not off-Broadway. However, I was unable to get Woody to go out of town, so though it was going to be my 3rd time in New York City with 3 one-acts, this time would be quite different. First, we'd be opening on Broadway, and second, there'd be no out-of-town tryout. Once again, we tried to come up with a title that represented all 3 plays. Since each concerned relatives, I had an idea. And excited, I met with the 3 writers and Letty, and I proposed my title. It's All Relative. Dead silence. Dead silence from the room. Then Ethan said, how about relatively speaking? I like It's All Relative better, I said. Both Woody and Elaine sided with Ethan, and that was that. It had been another long and arduous road to get to Broadway with 3 one-acts, and I resolved never to do it again. And yet...
I did do it again, and I write about that in the book.
Did you see my Hallmark Christmas movie this year?
No.
Oh,
I love Hallmark.
it was quite fun. I played a very wild grandma who had magic. It was just lovely. And I'm doing another one, a different character, for next Christmas for Hallmark. I'm enjoying them. And I have a wonderful collection at Williams-Sonoma. You must go and see that, yeah. And I'm working on a new television series, but I can't tell you about it yet. But I'm excited about it because I've really wanted to do a series again. And Julian and I are constantly looking for a new play for me. We've done a couple of plays together and a couple of movies together. So it's great to work with my friends like Elaine May and Julian and I. We're a great trio. Pardon me?
How did you first meet Julian?
Well, as he told you, I met him on his radio show. I was I think his 3rd guest on his radio show. And I walked in and sat down with this man I never knew, and he interviewed me for an hour. And when it was over, we went out to dinner, and we became the best of friends. Yeah, we just love each other. We're very, very good friends.
What kind of role would you like to take on that you haven't had a chance to take on?
I want to be surprised. I want somebody to bring me something that I haven't done before. That's the most exciting thing. You know, when I played the schizophrenic woman in Nobody's Child, it was very exciting to explore that woman's life, and she was a real person, so that was great to do research with the actual character. And then after that, I did another comedy with Mike Nichols on Broadway called Social Security. It's fun to bounce back and forth between drama and comedy.
Is there any role that has been written, though, that you haven't had a chance to play that you would just love to get your hands on?
The one that I love the best that I did get a chance to play was Martha in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. That was a real fresh piece for me to do, and I had to audition for it up at Hartford Stage, and I loved that. But I want to do parts that people haven't done before, you know? I spent my entire beginning of my career doing all the wonderful parts for girls, young girls, like Glass Menagerie and I can't even remember them all. There's so many of them. But all those wonderful, stories about young women. But it's not as much fun as to take a brand new script and look at it and say, who is this person and how do I find this person? That's the most exciting part. And Elaine May wrote that play for me, George is Dead. And when I first read it, I thought, this isn't anything that I've ever done before. This is great. This is a very uncharted person. She was mourning her husband, but instead of being sad and crying, she went off into panic and just couldn't stop talking, and then until the end, when she breaks down. But it was a wonderful character, and she was blonde and kind of dizzy. And I loved playing a dizzy blonde. That was fun too. It's so much fun to take your wig off at night, and and hang it up on the wall, and say, "Okay, I'll see you tomorrow." But now I'm going to go be me again.
And last question: is there anything that I haven't asked you that you would like our readers to know about you?
Well, I always want to say something about St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, which my father founded in 1962. And I'm just so privileged to be there. I just came back, and we have Ukraine children and their mothers there now. And so I was able to see them for the second time. I was there the first time to welcome them. So that's a great part of my life that brings me great joy to be able to help those kids go home.
Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, dear.
I was in London. I was dating my beautiful wife, and Mike Nichols was performing. He was not directing. He was performing in a play by Wally Shawn called The Designated Mourner in England, and invited me to see the play and have dinner with him afterwards. In the book, I talk about representing Nichols and May to this day. I still do, on their tapes and film clips, etc. So I went to dinner, and at the dinner, Mike said, "I've invited F. Murray Abraham. Do you know him?" I said, "I know who he is. I loved him in the Ritz 100 years ago." And, yeah, he said, "I'd like you to meet him." And he brought Kate, his wife, Murray did, and we had a wonderful time. And we became real friends. And it's been a long time. It's been 20, 30, God knows how many years. But we've, as you heard, we did a play together. And now Lila and Murray and I are hopefully going to be doing a play in the fall about Norman Mailer, where Murray will be playing Norman Mailer, and Lila will have the female lead, and it's a three-hander and rather an interesting play. I hope that the pandemic calms down a little bit so we can put that on without so much aggravation as we've had. So Murray, of course, being a great Shakespearean actor, I asked him if he would read my only connection with Shakespeare, so to speak.
American convention is held yearly called NATPE, the National Association of Television Program Executives. Castle Hill would attend religiously along with buyers and sellers of films from all over the world. We would either take a suite in the main hotel where it was happening, or have a booth on the convention floor. In 1991 in LA, two men walked into the Castle Hill suite without an appointment. They said they represented an unreleased film that Orson Welles had starred in and directed. I asked if it was Chimes at Midnight, which I knew hadn't been seen for years. They said no, and added that this one had been in storage for almost 40 years. I said I could be interested in distributing it. Welles was a great filmmaker, but had directed very few films. They then added that all of the worldwide rights were available. I asked what the name of the film was. They refused to tell me. Then left the suite, promising that they'd be in touch. I was disappointed, But since neither of them were in the film business, I had no idea if this was real. And by the way, if they had been in the film business, I almost certainly would have felt the same way, but at least I could have checked them out. All I knew was that they were lawyers who would be returning to their hometown, Chicago, right after our meeting. Our company was somewhat unique. We represented the films of some of the great film directors, towering talent like Alfred Hitchcock, Elia Kazan, John Ford, Ernest Lubitsch. Wow.
Those were the days.
Few independent film distributors had those kinds of names. With us, an Orson Welles film would be in good company. I wanted badly to represent a Welles film, but I wondered, was any of this real? Why couldn't they tell me the title? Were they meeting with other distributors? A week went by. No news. 2 weeks, nothing. By the third week, it was looking bad, and after a month, I gave up hope. Then one day, I was told I had a phone call from a Miss Wells. I didn't know who she was, but I took the call anyway. She explained that she was Orson Welles' daughter and would be in New York City the following week and wanted to meet. We set up an appointment. I was prepared to greet what I envisioned to be an older woman who, considering her father's girth, would be, well, plump. Remember, there was no Google to check people out in those days. She came into my office a tall, willowy young blonde who reminded me of a model. In fact, it turned out she was a model. Beatrice was the youngest daughter of Orson Welles and an Italian countess. She lived in Las Vegas and was the founder of a cosmetic line and a designer of jewelry. She had been directed to me by the two attorneys that I had met at NATP. She told me the film was Othello. I knew Welles had made Macbeth and his version of Falstaff, Chimes at Midnight. I didn't know of Othello. The film was in black and white, and Welles played the lead. Though there was a full cast, I didn't recognize the other names. I learned that there were two men in Chicago, Michael Dawson and Arnie Sachs, who were working on the restoration of the film. Edward Stone and Don Leibsker, the Chicago attorneys, were the restoration's executive producers, and the entire score was in the process of being re-recorded. Welles had started making the film in Italy 3 years after World War II. And when it ended, when sound recording was sadly inferior to the industry, so up-to-date equipment would be necessary, these 40 years later, he had taken Welles 4 years to complete the film. He kept running out of money and had to use his salary as an actor from The Third Man and The Prince of Foxes to continue shooting and editing. When the restoration was complete, the film was sent to me to screen in New York. It was a fine film with an excellent new score, recreated note for note. Sadly, however, it was often out of sync. In some parts, the actors' lips moved, but dialogue would not be heard. Beatrice and I had dinner afterwards, and I said, "This cannot be shown in its present form. We need to record an entire new sound mix, and the film must be put in sync." Beatrice agreed. Now came the task of finding a top sound mixer. Lee Dichter is one of the best sound mixers I know. He has worked with the top New York film directors, Mike Nichols, Robert Benton, Woody Allen, Nora Ephron, to name a few. I called him to ask if he could look at Othello, but he stopped me cold and said, "I'm totally booked for over a year." Knowing his high professional acumen, I had an idea. I asked whether he would at least look at the first reel. Give me some advice. Reluctantly, he said he would, and on the given date, we screened the reel. The first few minutes of Othello are breathtaking. There is no dialogue, but the photography is unbelievable. Incredible visuals of a funeral procession with Wells as a corpse being carried on wooden wheels, a man in a cage being pulled up the side of a huge castle, and operatic voices, plus a full orchestra accompanied all these magnificent images. Lee is an artist. I knew he would be in awe of what he saw on the screen, and sure enough, he turned to me and said, "You son of a bitch. I have to do this film, but I can only work weekends and some weekdays for a few hours after 6 p.m. I thanked him. I was relieved, ecstatic. My plan had worked. It took many months to complete the movie. Our enhanced version of the film was accepted at the Cannes Film Festival. In 1952, it had won the grand prize at the festival in 1992. We played out of competition at the Palais. As I described earlier, we walked the red carpet. It was a great send-off for the film, and Wells's genius was redeemed. It was only a highlight of my professional, it was truly a highlight of my professional life. That evening, after the screening, we had a party nearby to celebrate. And the actress Emma Thompson made it a point to find me and let me know how grateful she was for what we had done. She had just come to the party to tell me that, and she left immediately afterward. I'm still touched when I think of her kind gesture, and remember what our work can mean to the people within our industry. After doing some research, I was able to find out some of the film's history. Despite winning the Grand Prix in Cannes, no distributor in the United States had wanted the film. 3 years had gone by. Then in '55, United Artists had agreed to open the film in New York City only. It played at the Paris Theater and did no business. Despondent, Wills had put the negative in storage, where it had languished until Beatrice, the Chicago Gang, and Castle Hill brought it back to the world. Beatrice did many interviews and was a big plus in getting us publicity. One day she called me, upset. She told me she'd had an interview with the largest paper in Las Vegas, and they'd written about her childhood, her parents, and her company. Well, why are you so unhappy? I asked. It sounds like a fine article. The last line! It's not what I said! She told me. Regarding interviews, I was used to hearing that sentence coming from many people's lips, including my own. So I asked, what exactly is the last line that the reporter wrote? She quoted me as saying, she's most excited about the new release of her father's film, A Fellow.
That's Las Vegas for you.
The last line in that chapter is, hard to top that.
I love this man's acting. I am very excited to be interviewing F. Murray Abraham. What are you doing now? Where can we see you?
I'm working on a play with Julian Schlossberg. We're going to do something about Norman Mailer in about a month.
Really?
Yeah. It was written by his son.
Stephen? Buffalo? Okay.
Buffalo Mailer. And we'll do it in about a month. And cross your fingers.
I will. I actually was good friends with one of his wives, Beverly Bentley. Can we see you in film or TV as well right now?
Well, there are a lot of my old films around, and I'm going to be shooting one in Italy about 3 months from now. And I'm going to be visiting Claudia Cardinale in about 2 or 3 days.
Wow.
Talk to her about doing something.
How did you first meet Julian?
I was in London doing a play, and I dropped in to see Mike Nichols doing a play called The Designated Mourner. And I was backstage to say hello to Mike, because we had done a play together. And I was invited to go and have dinner at Joe Allen in London. There's a Joe Allen there, you know.
No, I didn't. I'm like, oh, wow.
And when I got there, Julian was part of the group. And when Julian had to leave to catch a plane or something, as he left, Mike said, "There goes the nicest producer in show business." And it turns out that it was true. But before Julian left, within our conversation, he said, "I'm going to produce a play for you." And he said, "But I'm serious. I really am." And he did.
Wow.
In his own theater.
Is there a role that you've never had a chance to play that you would love to play?
Many.
Such as?
Well, I've played Lear. I want to play her again, but I would like to play an outrageous comedy. I think it's time to make people laugh again. People seem to have forgotten.
Absolutely. I agree. Laughter is the key right now.
Yeah?
And is there anything that I haven't asked you that you would like our audiences to know about you?
I think that it's time to stop being so angry with each other and start reaching out to each other. It's important to have causes and to fight for those causes. But if you remain angry about them, I don't know how you can accomplish anything. If you're angry about them at the beginning, you're only going to get angry. And anyhow, what I'm saying is pretty obvious. I think it's time to open up each other to each other's opinions.
Amen.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes, I do. Thank you so much for talking with us.
Thank you all for listening. I hope you'll read some more chapters. My company was called Castle Hill because Schlossberg translates to castle. Schloss is a castle, and Berg is generally a mountain. But I figured Paramount had the mountain already, and I wasn't going to start a company with them. I went to a hill. So that's how it became Castle Hill. Thank you appreciate it so much, and thank you all for coming.
I don't think there's a time that I didn't ever know this man's name. He does film, TV, theater. He is one of the nicest men in this industry and cares about this industry and the people involved in it. We're talking Julian Schlossberg. Julian, what was the first theater piece that you got involved in?
Renee Taylor and Joe Bologna, who wrote Lovers and Other Strangers, came to me with a play they had written, and they wanted to know if I'd produce it. I said, look, I've never produced a play. I've done movies and I've done TV, but I don't know much about theater, except I love going to it. Renee said, so you'll learn with us. So I said, all right, well, I'll have to try to raise the money. And at that time, I was kind of consulting for a company called Abco, which was owned by a man named Alan Klein. Alan Klein had managed Sam Cooke, the Beatles, and the Rolling Stones. He was quite a man in his own time, a very controversial man. But he liked me and I liked him, and I said, let's listen to this play together. And we heard the play, we loved the play. That Renee and Joe was only a two-hander, and they read it to us, and he took me in the corner and he said, you've never produced a play, have you? I said, no. I said, have you? He said, no. He said, come on, we'll learn together.
The blind leading the blind.
Absolutely.
And then we can see.
And so I walked back into the room and I said, Renee and Joe, you've got producers and you've got the money. Because he could put all the money up, as he did. Anyhow, we went to California to celebrate, and we were at the Beverly Hills Hotel, and there are bungalows outside the hotel.
Right.
And it's about 1 in the morning, and we're walking to the bungalows when we were all a little tipsy, when Joe Bologna yells out, "We have the only go deal in the hotel."
What show would you have liked to have produced that you didn't get a chance to?
Well, I actually thought I was going to produce art. Tom Courtney and I were friends, and he had done a play for me called Moscow Stations that we produced in New York. And he said, I'm working with Albert Finney, and we're doing a play in London, and we need money. Would you be interested? I said, yeah, I'd be interested. I'd like to get the American rights, and I'd like to read the play. So he sent the play. I loved the play, and I said, I'm in. I'll do it. And he said, okay, I'll give the producer your name and number. I never heard from him, from the producer. So a couple of days went by, and I called Tom. I said, Tom, I never heard from the guy. He said, look, if you don't hear from him, Albert and I'll quit. I said, you can't quit. Don't be silly. I mean, he may have the money. So anyhow, he called back a couple of days later. He did get the money, and that's what had happened. So I came that close to art to bring it to
Wow.
America, but it didn't happen. It was very interesting, too, because I went to the closing night in London as Albert and Tom's guest.
Right.
And interestingly enough, they wouldn't let the producer in. They
Are
didn't
you kidding?
really.
Sometimes this industry boggles your mind.
Yes, and that's a nice way of putting it.
It is a nice way of putting
Yes.
it. I'm trying to learn how to be tactful these days.
You did a beautiful job just then.
You're doing a new play based on Norman Mailer.
Yes. Yes.
What other actors and other subjects would you like to take on next?
Well, I actually have, believe it or not, Susanna, 14 projects. 14.
Holy.
Now, you as a producer, you have to have more than two
Of
or
course.
three. You don't necessarily need 14, however. But I've offered some of the writers to let them have the play or movie back because I can't do much during the pandemic. I
Right.
just don't feel I can. I tried with Mornings at 7,
Right,
and
and-
it just didn't happen with a wonderful cast. So,
Yeah, Marie McCormick.
yeah, that's right. Isn't that great? Patty McCormick came back. Isn't
Oh,
that
Patty
some-
McCormick,
Yeah,
sorry.
that's okay. If you got your McCormicks right.
No, but I love the Bad Seed.
Yeah, me too. But anyhow, I'm doing a play with Susan Stroman, a musical on the life of Alan J. Lerner and Frederick Lowe, with John Law from The New Yorker, wrote the wonderful play, and she's going to choreograph and direct it. Story of their life, how they came to write together, and how their successes and how their fights and whatever they had together.
Wow.
It's a lovely, lovely piece. I'm very proud of it, and I can't wait to do it. But this spring, in the George Street Theater, we're going to do Steve Guttenberg tells the story of how he became.
I just interviewed Steve.
Well, you know.
Yes, 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 yes.
And how he became a movie star.
Yes,
I
and
mean, and it's we call it Tales from the Guttenberg Bible, and Steve and 3 other actors will be doing it, and we're quite excited about it.
Yeah, he's a really nice guy.
Hello, one of the nicest people you ever want to meet.
Yeah, I just interviewed him, and he talked about this.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm glad he's plugging it then.
He is definitely plugging it.
Okay.
Is there something, though, that you haven't been able to work on yet that you're dying to have your little hands on?
No, I think I've been very fortunate, Suzanne. I've been doing it 60 years, so it's a long time. And I think the great thing for me was to become friends with Elaine May, who is
Brilliant.
in words. In the book, I put down BFF, the best friend forever. And what she did for me, she really said, you shouldn't be a studio executive, you should be a producer. She changed my life.
Oh,
and
wow.
I produced all her plays, and she's my dearest friend.
Wait, did you produce? I'm trying to think of the name of the play, the last play she did.
Oh no, that she wrote.
Yes,
The last play she
okay.
won the Tony for the Waverly
Yeah,
Gallery. That's
fabulous.
Kenny Lonergan.
That
a
was
wonderful,
fabulous.
Yeah, but no, anything
And
she wrote.
was fabulous.
Oh yeah, and that's why she won the Tony.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Is there any actor, though, that you haven't had a chance to work with that you'd like to work with?
Well, I was going to have dinner with Orson Welles in L.A., and I was so excited. Henry Jaglin was a very good friend of his, a director and writer himself, and we were going to go to Ma Maison, and I got a call from WMCA, and they said, hey, you take off 4 weeks every year when you go to the Cannes Film Festival, and then you take your vacation. You can't miss another week. You know, we let you take 4 weeks off. This is a call-in show. This isn't, And I said, I'll come back. I had to cancel. So that was I really felt bad about that. And I never could get it back together again. Never.
I had the biggest crush on him from Jane Eyre.
Oh, how could you not? My God, yeah.
I'm like this big romantic, so that was...
Well, that's the picture to feel that way about.
And I love old films, and I wish some of them would come back.
Well, TCM, if anybody can do it, it'll be TCM.
Right.
Yeah.
What is Castle Hill doing now?
Cassie Hill was sold,
Okay.
which made me able to write the book, too.
Will you be writing more books?
Yeah, I'm in the middle. I have 20 chapters of the next book.
What's the next one called?
I don't know yet. I didn't even know this was fortunately, I had called Burt Reynolds to do Sly Fox on Broadway.
Oh, okay.
And because he had done theater, had
Right.
his own theater, and I left him a message. I said, Burt, my name is Julian Schlossberg. I'm a New York City producer. Try not to hold it against me. The agent loved it. That's how it became the title.
Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you would like our readers to know?
Oh, I'd like your readers to buy the book.
Tell us the name of the book again.
Try not to hold it against me, A Producer's Life. I hope they will. Thank you, Susanna.
Thank you, and I can tell our readers that it is one funny book.